Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Being the Best Version of Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. Today, we have a special guest who's returning for her second appearance on the podcast. All right, Lauren, why don't you reintroduce yourself to the listeners?
Thank you so much. So I'm Lauren Eckert, and I'm the owner of Life Solved. It's an executive function coaching business. We work with K through 12, college and young adult and adults, and helping them figure out how to manage themselves, how to get tasks done, how to stay organized, how to reach their goals. And yeah, my background, I was a teacher and then I was a school counselor. And as I was pursuing my therapy license, I really started to gain a passion in coaching and this different model of helping people reach their goals and manage overwhelm. And so I kind of stumbled into it about 12 years ago, and it's been such a wonderful way for me to support the individuals that I work with. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be back to
Yeah.
have a
Well,
next conversation. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, happy to have you back. And yeah, it's always great to chat. All right. So our starting topic for today is the idea of looking at how parents can help themselves to organize their lives and especially keep track of their kids' activities and other things. Just because for a lot, probably for most parents, life is busy.
Yeah.
Whether it's sports schedule, there's after school activity, doctor's appointments. There's a lot to keep track of. And I think if you're not careful, it's probably very easy to miss things. And
Yes.
so, what are some kind of things that you recommend in terms of practical strategies that parents can use to really help keep track of their kids' schedules and things like that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I think I always want to acknowledge for parents. I know this is true for myself. I have 3 kids. It is a lot. It is a lot. So even before when we have parents that reach out to us all the time, which was just kind of like a natural extension of the work we were doing with K through 12 students, which is where our company started, was then we found that the parents were so overwhelmed trying to manage all the different aspects of their kids. And often the parents have their own executive function challenges, right? And their own ADHD, or sometimes it's just the stress and the mental load of being a parent, which has been my experience, right? All of a sudden, the way I used to do things, the routines I had, the organization that I had set up in
Yeah.
my home just goes out the window, right? So, first, I always just like to acknowledge for the parents that we coach and that we work with, it's a lot. It's okay to say it's a lot. It's overwhelming. Not only are you trying to be your own individual person and manage your interests, your hobbies, your health, your work, if you work, right? Your friendships, your kids, you want to be present, you want to be making meals. It's like never ending. And I think with all the access we have on social media, all the information overload, all the news in the world, I find as a parent, my brain just never, ever, ever stops. And so it's not surprising to me, even as someone who is generally pretty organized, when I'm like, oh, there was a bake sale today. I missed that, right? Because it's just so much. So I always like to just start there before we even talk strategy because it's so much. And we are our own individual people trying to live our lives for the first time. And then we're managing these little people, and the older that they get, the more things that they have. My oldest is in first grade, and I can't believe already how many birthday parties we have every weekend, soccer, basketball, dance. And now my middle daughter is doing stuff. And I'm like, wait, we're going to need like a whole team to get them everywhere. I don't know if you feel that way, but I think it's just, first of all, acknowledging the mental load and just that it is a lot. And it makes sense if you as a parent are feeling overwhelmed trying to manage these tasks, you are not alone. And I think the demand on us as parents, especially in this area, is a lot. And I think it's okay to just start there and just say, this is a lot. And not one strategy is going to work for every family and every need.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that acknowledgement of recognizing that, it is a lot to keep track of in terms of all different activities, all the emails from school, various other activities, trying to, figure out how best to organize it. And the idea of just maybe feeling overwhelmed by all the information coming at you with different
Right.
things.
Right.
Or things you need to get for your kids for, different things at school. Like it's sort of never ending. And so I agree. I think that acceptance is the first part. And what you mentioned is really crucial with the idea how it's not one size fits all. That,
Right.
each person's different in what their needs are. Obviously, the things you're trying to keep track of for your kids may be quite different. And so that can sometimes impact what kind of system might work best also.
Right. And I think then when we talk about systems and we get to strategies, which I have some really tangible strategies that I want to talk about in a little bit, but when we just think about systems overall, depending on the family, I do think sometimes we have to start with the parent first. So a lot of times parents will reach out to us for coaching and their family, in their own words, is a mess, right? Like everybody's everywhere. They're fighting over homework. They're forgetting to make meals. They're losing their lunchbox. The parents are stressed. And it's like, where do we even begin? I feel like I can't manage everything. It's like the airplane, right? Put your own mask on first. So we always recommend when we're thinking about systems for the family to really identify and look at the parent systems first, right? What strategies are you using to manage yourself, to manage your stress, to stay regulated emotionally, personally, right? What routines do you have in place? Because not only are you modeling that to your kids, but if you're trying to keep your kids organized, and you are losing your mind and everything is everywhere all the time, it's a losing battle. You're never going to feel not overwhelmed, right? So I think that that's a really important first step is identifying my own personal systems and strategies. And we can talk about some that might work. But then from there, it is looking at the family system as a whole and really finding ways to try to minimize the overwhelm, minimize the logistics. And if you are a single parent or if you're partnering with somebody, using the community around you and whatever that looks like, we all have our different community, right? Some of us have much more support and resources than others. So each family has to kind of assess their needs, their abilities, how much they've put on their plate. And that's really where we start thinking about those underlying systems. I think a mistake a lot of parents make that I meet are they're doing too many things, right? They're trying to like create the checklist and they're doing the to-do list. They're trying to meal prep and they're starting 20 different systems and none of them are actually working for the family. And then actually the systems themselves and the to-do list become another burden on the mental load, right? I have
Right, or it
found,
takes so much time to do it, and it's not actually
yes,
helpful because it's also, it's like the idea also that it's not just about having a system. But like, I mean, like a task list, for example, in theory, it could work well, but it's more about how you actually use it that becomes helpful because it's just a bunch of stuff on a list. It doesn't mean it's going to get done.
right. And then the list itself, I had this one client for years where she would always put things on a list. And then one of her action items every week when I met her was she would put that list into another list. And I was like, the list is becoming the problem here, right? Like the lists and the lists. And so I found, before I had kids, people would probably refer to me as someone who's very organized. You'd come to my house, you'd open the cabinet, be like, oh, you need batteries, you need band-aids. Everything was ahead of place. Now, if you came to my house, even as someone who runs an executive function business, you'd be like, where are the band-aids? I'd be like, I don't know, ask my 4-year-old. She probably has them
Yeah,
in the playroom, right? Like, I've had to completely adapt how I think and manage myself and my time because I have 3 children now and it looks so different. And so a lot of the systems or the tools and strategies that worked for me before having children, I've completely had to revamp. And so I think it's just first pausing, really assessing, what things am I using? Am I using apps and a written planner? And I'm trying to manage everything over text and then I'm missing emails, right? So I have all these different ways that I'm managing my kids and now I'm starting to lose track of things or I feel overwhelmed. Then we want to go back to the basics. I really believe the less things that we have to try to keep ourselves organized, often the simpler it is to stay organized, right?
exactly. Like I think that's the crucial thing is keep it as simple as possible.
Simplify. And because everything else is already so chaotic and overwhelming that we
Yeah.
don't want the actual solution to the problem to become even more overwhelming than the problem was in the first place. So that's the second point I always like to highlight and before we dive into actual strategies. And I think the third point, which is part of how we do strategize here and get to actual solutions, is to minimize as much decision making in the moment as possible. So a lot of the overwhelm and overload for parents and a lot of the research indicates that the more decisions I have to make every day, the more overloaded I am, the more likely I am to forget something, right? And I always joke before I had kids, I had a excellent working memory. If you had told me something this morning and you were like, "Hey Lauren, can you send me this?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, of course." And that afternoon when I got to my computer, I would have been able to return that back to myself, send that email to you. I just had a really beautiful ability to hold on to information. That is completely erased. I think my second child sort of stole it. My third child wiped it out clean. If you ask me to do something, I need to write it down right now. That's why before we even started this podcast, I made a note to myself on my my checklist that I need to send you something afterwards because it will be gone. So I had to redo and readjust how I manage action items, how I manage information in the moment. And for me, a lot of my overwhelm comes when there is a lot to decide about, right? When I have a space that is cluttered, when my house doesn't have places for things, right? I'm spending all morning looking for the school shoes and the library book. It sets my morning off in a bad way and all the morning routine goes out the window, right? So where possible, I encourage not just to simplify the systems and the tools that we're using, but to actually simplify your space, simplify the amount of decisions that you're making, simplify the amount of stuff that you're having to decide about and between, recognizing that you don't have to have your kids in every single activity, going to every single event they're invited to. You have to really take a look at your family's needs right now, your resources, your mental state, and decide how much are we actually able to do while still being a family unit and still enjoying time with one another, not just always passing each other as these chaotic ships, right? So I think those are kind of my three thoughts when I really talk about strategies and start to work on systems with the family is just acknowledge it's really hard. It's very overwhelming. And then to look at this fact that we do have a need for systems, but sometimes we're trying to do too much at once and we want to simplify. And then where can we really minimize the number of decisions and the number of things that you have to manage every day? The more we can streamline, the easier it's going to feel to manage all these different moving parts. So those are kind of my thoughts as I just think about parenting as a whole, managing these systems and all of these child activities and the schedules as a whole. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but those are kind of when I think just as a parent myself and for the parents that I coach and work with to really help give them a framework before we start diving into the details of how they're actually managing their lists of to-dos, the field trip requests, the volunteer, all of the things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think that all of that makes a lot of sense. I think it's vital to, because you can't just jump and like pick an app or pick a system. You
Right.
have to look at what are your actual needs and then using that to develop the system and try and keep it as simple as possible. And just one thing I wanted to highlight, you mentioned a little while ago is the idea of, memory. And the idea, the one thing I find really helpful to focus on with people is the idea of don't rely on your memory for tasks generally.
Yeah.
The idea of the more you can have written down, it takes that mental load out of your mind. And, as long as it's in front of you and not so many things it's overwhelming, can make it much easier to get stuff done and and be reminded of stuff and not have to rely on your memory for tasks because that itself can also create more stress.
Right. And that's, I think, a big piece of this is really being aware of what stresses you out, right? What is adding to your mental load and making you feel stressed? I have friends that can live in clutter and manage all the things and they don't seem phased. But then when their kid has a meltdown over something out in public, they can't manage it, right? Whereas for me, I'm okay with that if my kid's really struggling and needs some help with emotional regulation. But when my house feels jam packed with stuff or overloaded with things, or if I've overcommitted us, I start to feel myself to shut down, right? So really identifying what are some of your stress triggers and how can you simplify things so that you're not continuing to put yourself in a situation where you can't function optimally, right? Where you keep putting yourself in a situation where you said yes to 10 things and you're like, why am I the one here setting up the donut day, right? Like, why did I say
Yeah.
yes to this when I have 50 other things? Because I want to be a present parent and I want to be involved in the school. So why don't I pick two or three things that are really important to me that I'm going to commit myself to? And then the rest of it, I'm going to give myself permission to say, that's not for me this year, right? So finding that balance and simplifying in the ways, especially that you yourself have identified really are triggers for you or really send you into that overwhelm. Because when we're dysregulated, it's really difficult to support our children and help them stay regulated, help them stay calm when they come home and they're upset about school. They're upset that they lost their soccer game, right? They have homework they don't understand. And if you're maxed out, stressed out to the, and you can't even focus and listen, it's not a good environment for anyone. So, one of the main strategies that I really love is so simple. And actually, my parents did this when we were younger. And we went through periods of time where we were consistent with it and when we were not. And I think if you were to look in from the outside, you probably would have known when we were actually using this. And that was a weekly family meeting. Again, it feels really, really basic. This is something I recommend to families all the time. It can be just between the parents, depending on the age of the kids, or you can have two separate meetings where the parents connect and then you include the kids. This is a great time to review the schedule for the week, to talk about what's coming up, to make sure if you have a central calendar, everybody's aware. And as your kids get older, they can take more responsibility with these things, right? Being aware that you have guests coming on Wednesday or that there is a dentist appointment in the middle of the school day, so they need to let their teacher know, right? Getting everybody looped in so that you and your partner can also figure out, oh, okay, actually, I have something for work on Tuesday morning. I can't take the kids to school. When this becomes stressful is when we're all realizing this together at the same time on Tuesday morning, right? when we haven't taken the time. So not only do family meetings give your kids an opportunity to have some autonomy, to feel part of the conversation, you can plan some goals as a family. You can identify something fun. Maybe once a week, you do a really fun family activity. You can talk about food for the week. There's so many ways you can use the family meeting. You can also just keep it really simple. Like, hey guys, this week, this is the schedule.
Yeah.
Here's where I need help from you, right? But I think often we are just buzzing by one another and just we get so zoomed in and focused on all the things that sometimes just taking a step back. And I like to do this in 3 steps. One is I plan by myself first, take, like an hour, a power hour to just really set up the week, not just for me, but for my family. Check the school calendar, check anything from the coaches. Did I RSVP to anything, right? Take a look. I have a big central calendar in the house. So, I'll verify that that's accurate for the week. Do
Yes.
the kids have hot lunch, right? Like all these little details that feel like they should be obvious, but when it comes time, they just slip out of our mind, right? So I do my own. Then my husband and I will touch base and say, okay, what's your work schedule like? Do we need someone to help us with this? And then we'll loop the kids in. And our kids are little. So at this time, it really just looks like, hey guys, this is what we have coming up this week, right? And what do you want to be a goal of yours this week? We're starting to set this foundation so that as they get older, we hope that they'll take on more with their chores, more responsibility, but also that as a family, we're all on the same page. So I think that's one really basic strategy to help start the process of making sure that you are aware of what's coming up. It doesn't prevent those curveballs that you can't expect and the snow days and the delays and the canceled rides and all those things that you can't plan for, but you at least have a framework or a starting point for the upcoming week.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, I think that before you can even get to any sort of, how you actually keep track of this stuff, the idea of having the meeting to actually review it, I think is crucial because, if you have it in any sort of written form, it's great that it's in there, but unless you actually look at it and view it, you're really
Right.
not going to understand it. You're less likely to catch if there's any sort of overlap or conflict.
Right.
I think that makes perfect sense. And then, I think, from there, I think, like my sort of central idea is often that, I mean, it depends on the age of your kids, that I
Right.
think for younger kids, having something visual, like kind of like a calendar hanging up or something they can see what the schedule for the week is helpful. And then, the meeting is a great time to really update it and have the kids when they're old enough to even write in the stuff themselves.
Correct. Yeah. And,
Um,
and every person in the family might, as they get older, have their own way they want to track their individual stuff. And I joke, my husband doesn't mind that I share this, but years ago, I think it was one of our kids' birthdays, and I had not set up the calendar. Her birthday's really early in the month. So we each have our own individual calendars. And then we have this big one in the kitchen that I typically set up on the first of the month. Now, some weeks it just doesn't happen, right? Some months. So I was like getting things organized and he was like, what are you setting up for? I was like, oh, it's Sophia's birthday party tomorrow. And he was like, it's not on the calendar, right? Like on the big calendar. And he knew that it was coming up. He knew that there were, but we realized that we were kind of operating with our own unique different systems. And we couldn't have just this one main hub be our only reliable way of communication. And so that's where we decided to do more of like a shared Google calendar because we both keep our calendars very up to date for work and everything. So we have spaces. And then there's been times where I didn't know about things coming up that might have been on his calendar. So that was a big wake up call for us as new parents to be like, okay, the system that worked for us before we had kids needs a little updating or a little tweaking, right? If we're only relying on this like kitchen calendar, but we're all updating our own things everywhere else, it can get a little confusing. So I think it's about figuring out the systems that work for yourself individually and how you merge or collaborate with the people in the family that are old enough to be managing themselves, right? So that everyone's on the same page. So a meeting can be helpful for that. Shared calendars can be really useful. I love what you said about having the children start to write in or plan out their own action items for the week. And when it's age appropriate, that can look like also mapping out their own routines in the morning, in the afternoon, their chores, because the more independent they become in those areas, that does start to alleviate some of the stress on you a little bit. My first grader just started packing her own lunch. She's like very focused on this like morning routine she has, and we're just letting her do her thing. We love it. We think it's adorable. And I can't tell you how much time it saves me in the morning just to have one of the lunches taken care of. Now, sometimes I have to peek in there and be like, what are you putting in your lunch? Right. But she's pretty good at it. And so as they get older and they take on more tasks and more independence, not only are we supporting them in building these crucial skills, it does start to alleviate a little bit. But again, as they get older, if we're talking middle and high school and they're making their own plans and they have their own stuff coming up that you might not know about, finding a way to have a shared piece of information, whether it's a Google Calendar, utilizing a family meeting, so that we're not kind of all operating with our own systems and missing the mark with each other.
Right, exactly. So I think having a shared central system is really important. One of the things I found really helpful is, so I use for family Apple Calendar. What I really like about it is that, and I can probably use it in Google Calendar as well, is that basically when one person in the family adds an event to the calendar, everyone else gets a notification. So it's nice because then this way, I see notifications and I think, oh, and I look and see, oh, there's actually conflict. I catch it when the event is first added as opposed to the day of the event.
Correct.
Feel like that's really helpful. Like, when you're adding stuff to a calendar, a couple of thoughts here. One would be, make sure you actually look at the day of the event when you're typing it in. Because sometimes people will hit the button, type a new event, but not actually look at that day to see what else they have scheduled when they put something on a calendar. And then you're more likely to realize that, or not realize that there's an error, a conflict, if you don't actually look at the day when you're putting in the event.
Right. Right. And that's where I think that having simpler systems, like I was talking about earlier, because a mistake or a challenge that I think some of my clients run into is that when they're out and about and somebody asks something of them, they're like, oh, yeah, I can do that. I'll write it down. So they might have a place they write it down, or they text it to themselves, or, and so they're actually saving information in 5, 6, 7 different places, but then they're not taking or having a time where everything gets centralized again. So it's so easy to miss stuff. And that's where I find as a pitfall for me is if I'm not automatically putting it in my calendar, and that's why I love Google Calendar, just because it's on my phone too. And then, like you said, I pull it up and I'm like, oh, the girls have a dentist appointment. I can't commit to that, or I have to move the dentist appointment, right? But I'm holding myself to something I've committed to. I'm actually writing it down. And then I don't have to have the stress of at a later time evaluating 6 different places where I put things like, oh, my planner, or I texted that to myself, or I put a mental note and now it's gone, right? So simplifying your systems and really making sure, like you said, am I available at this time? Am I plugging it in? So that when there are conflicts, which depending on the number of kids, depending on your family and your support system, there's going to be conflicts, right? We can't get to everything. We're going to have to coordinate different activities in different ways. But the more we can have a system or a calendar that's mapped out ahead of time, where we're aware of those conflicts, where we've thought through the logistics a little bit, the better it's going to feel in the moment, right? It's those stressful days are the ones where, we wake up and we realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I can't take the kids to school this morning because I have this, right? So as much pre-planning and simplified tracking is best. And we have some families that use the Skylight calendar. Have you heard of that? It's like a
Yeah, no, I've seen, I don't own one. I've thought about getting one. I've seen it quite a bit.
yeah,
I work with them a lot
I
with
don't
kids
know
I
if it
work
would
with.
work. Yeah, I don't know if it would work for my family in the current stage, but I have friends with similar age kids that have loved it. And I've started having a few of our clients and families start incorporating it. And for certain families, it can be really, really useful. Other times it's as simple as like a true just chore chart, which my kids really love. They like to come up with their own routine and the ways they want to participate each week. And we just do that as a visual up in our little family center in the kitchen. So I think it's just about finding what works at each phase of your kids' lives to manage. But we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of technology now that can help ease some of the mental load, right? There are so many apps, there's so many tools, not only for your individual system as a parent, right? Maybe you're tracking things with ClickUp or Todoist or one of these apps that helps you prioritize and manage time. But then there's also apps and resources now to help manage the family activities, to help take some of that mental load. And so if you're someone who's feeling just don't even know where to start, completely overwhelmed, I think it's just start by streamlining, right? Reducing the number of decisions and then finding one tool that you can incorporate into a system for your family. The Skylight calendar I just mentioned because I've seen a lot of families really enjoy the physical aspect of that, where kids can actually check off their chores for the day. Everybody looks and sees what's on the calendar. Each kid can have a different color and see their items for the day. But there's a way to do that with a big, dry erase calendar. There's a way to do that on Google Calendar. I think it's just about picking something, making sure you spend time each week checking it and making sure it's correct, and then utilizing it, right? Every tool is useless if it's not used properly within the framework of a bigger system. So there's so many ways you can incorporate technology if you're feeling that you're just like so overwhelmed and you don't even know where to begin. You can look up, there's lists and lists of tools out there to help families manage this type of thing. I find I get a little overwhelmed with technology sometimes because, for my kids' school, I'm on 8 different apps just managing the stuff from the teachers at this point. But there are some really great, there's like Family Wall, there's Family Tools app, there's an app called Cozy. I mean, there's all sorts of things out there to help families streamline, manage tasks, manage goals as a family. If you're somebody who feels incorporating technology would be helpful, if you struggle to keep, like a physical calendar updated. So those are just some other ideas. As we said in the beginning, there's no one size approach here, right? Every family is unique. Every phase of every family is unique. So as your kids get into different ages and different areas, you might have to adjust how you're doing things. But I think it just keeps coming back to that idea of really making sure that you yourself has systems in place, that you feel that you are prioritizing your needs as well. And because if you're just running around all the time, losing your mind trying to manage everybody else's stuff, and you haven't even had any water or breakfast, which I know happens to a lot of us, then you're not doing anyone any favors. And I think when we take a few steps back and just again look at the big picture of being a parent, we want to look back and feel like we were present. And I know a lot of times for me, especially when my first two were younger, I felt this like strong pull whenever I was with them to be productive, but also want to be present, which I know I've mentioned often. But productivity and being on top of things is a really important part of being a parent, but also pausing and being present. I think the more we can streamline, reduce our decision making, reduce the overwhelm of the family, whatever that looks like, the more present we can be to actually sit down and enjoy time with them. Because when they're home, we're not running around trying to do a million different things. So, lots of different ways that families can approach it, but I think it's just trying to get down to the basics, having some shared communication system to make sure we're all on the same page, and do as much reduction of decision making as you can throughout the day. So as much as you can pre-plan, that helps the day ahead of you go smoother.
Yeah, no, that's definitely all really great advice. I definitely appreciate you sharing it. I think to
Yeah.
sort of add to it a little bit, I mean, Cozy is definitely an app I recommend a lot. I mean, one thing to like, thinking back to this idea of skylight calendar, one thing people can do at home if they don't have a skylight calendar or want to try out this idea of it is to even just, if you have an old iPad laying around, set it up like in a dock and, in a common area at the kitchen, set up the Cozy app on it. And you can do a lot of the same stuff with like a, checklist for kids and things like that, or even on a different app. And then you can also lock the iPad on that app. So then
Right.
this way, it, kind of creates that ability for, kids, to be able to use it, without going and, getting a skylight to start or, try that. And if you like that idea and, invest in a
Right.
skylight. So I think that's just, something I figured I would share that I think could be helpful.
I
One
love
of the
that.
other, things. And one of the other crucial points you mentioned, this idea of, keep it as simple as possible and put everything in one place. And I think, given like, for, if you have a lot of families that play sports, each league usually has its own app of some kind for the schedule and things like that. And so, kind of a very practical recommendation I have with that is basically to, whether it's Team Snap or Sports Engine or the Sideline app or whichever one your team uses or your sports league uses, you can usually sync the calendar from those apps to an external calendar. So if you sync that to Google Calendar or Apple Calendar or whatever calendar you use, put that on the family calendar. And then the great thing about that is, no matter how many different sports leagues your kids are in one season, you can see all the games and practices all in one place on a central calendar. And what's also really great about doing that is if something changes, it automatically
Right.
updates itself usually in the calendar. So it's great because if there's ever an issue, you recognize it when you look at it as opposed to having to go back to the app. Because I think if people think, I'll just check the app, to see what the schedule is, the problem is if you forget to check it and then something's changed, you don't realize it, you may not realize it till the last minute.
Right.
That's something I found to be really helpful. I've had occasions where, a game's gotten changed and the league never sent me an email to tell me that. And so I realized it because I went to go look ahead for the next week on my schedule for something and realized that the time of the game and the opponent had changed from what originally was because the original event was different than what was showing up on the calendar as the next game. And so the
Right.
point is that I think that the more you can centralize it, and also you don't have to think about it because once it's set up and syncing properly, you don't have to think about constantly logging into each of these apps or wherever the schedule is if it's all feeding into one central calendar.
Yeah. I think that's just such a good example of streamline, right? I did that with my daughter's school calendar at the beginning of the year, and they change things all the time. Like the hot lunch, everything is there. So I can just view it on Google. And if I wasn't doing that, I know each week I'd be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I was supposed to send this in, right? So a lot of this is just working smarter, right? Not harder. It's like, okay, there are tools to help me simplify. There are tools to help me integrate stuff that the school has done, that the basketball team has done, and put it all in one place. So, as much simplification as possible. And also just to give yourself some grace, right? Like, we are not going to do all of this perfectly. We are going to forget things. We are going to not text that person back. This is such like a unique time of life. And it's such a special time, but also it, again, we're trying to figure out who we are in this phase and how we make time for ourselves and work and friends and all those things. Try to be present and not miss the moments that are flying by with our kids, as everyone reminds us. And we have to manage logistics of like a small company, right? Like it's like there are so many logistics and things to do every day, and you feed them, you make sure they have the clothes they need, you're signing up for things. It is a lot. So give yourself grace. None of us are doing it perfectly. All of us are learning constantly. And if you look at somebody or a friend that you see that feels like they have it all together, I guarantee they don't. But it would be worthwhile to maybe say, hey, what does your family use to kind of keep track of all of this stuff? Well, there's a lot of value in community. And I think we lose community sometimes anymore because we're always just looking at ideas on social media. But to talk to our friends, what do you use to keep your family organized? How do you keep track of all this stuff you have going on? And we can share ideas and collaborate and see what works and what doesn't. And I think that could be another way to also not feel so alone in this what can feel really stressful time of life.
Yeah, no, that's definitely great advice. And I think the more you can kind of share information with other people, it, helps them to sort of, because it gives you new ideas. Oh, I could try this. This might actually work well. Let me try this for my family.
Yep.
So again, I think the more you communicate openly about this stuff, help each other. Like especially if you're involved in organizing various activities, the easier you can make it for people to keep track of stuff. So like, let's say you're organizing something, I don't know, for the PTA or let's say a bake sale or something. Set it up in a way where people can add that stuff to their calendar. Have a very simple way of seeing the sign up because
Right.
then it just simplifies it for everyone if you're organizing it to begin with.
Yeah. And I do think, as just like my final thought, when I think for myself, it all comes back to my personal way I manage my to do list before I even think about my family, because everything I have to do for myself, for my work, for my personal commitments, and for my kids all has a central spot. I use ClickUp. That's just what works really well for me. It's a free tool, and I like how you can prioritize tasks. But without that and without a place to organize and put those things, I think the rest of it would fall apart for me. So finding what works for yourself, right? Putting that oxygen mask on first so that you feel in control of your action items and to-do list, it's going to make it so much easier to coordinate the many moving parts and never changing things of being a mom, being a dad, being a parent, right? Because they're just, as you said, the game gets canceled, it gets rescheduled. There's this new thing at school. They have a test you didn't know about. Just the more you can have a one spot that you really know you can look to and trust and it's reliable, the better, right? And taking a little bit of time each week to assess that and look at your upcoming week goes a really, really long way. It's a simple concept, but it goes a really long way. And the more you can include your family in that, you're giving them a lot of opportunity to build autonomy, to be independent, and to continue to create some of those habits for themselves as they eventually go on and one day maybe manage a family or a job.
Well, that's great. I think it's definitely a very important final thought to leave people with. And if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, well, thank you. So our website is lifesolvedcoaching.com. And so if this is something, if you feel like, oh, I want more ideas on how to put a system in place, or if you struggle deeply individually, we offer group and individual coaching around these topics. We have our Instagram, which is life.solved. And as you check out our website, you can join our email list. We're always sending out free ideas and tips and strategies and tools for families. So feel free to check it out. And again, thank you so much for having me. I always love to join up with others and talk about these things and brainstorm. I think part of it is just taking the time to pause and think and maybe reassess what I'm currently doing. I even have an idea now for my kids when I go home just from this conversation, right? So sometimes it's a good thing to just take some time to listen to a podcast or talk with a friend and see, what could I maybe shift a little bit to make my life feel a little easier this week?
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, and again, I think it's I hope everyone listening can certainly take a lot from this as well. And it's the idea: the more you take the time to actually think about it and evaluate what you're doing and what's working, and what's not, the more effective you're going to be in ensuring whatever systems you're using are working well and
Right.
as effectively as they can be. And so,
Yeah.
thanks again for joining today.
Yeah.
It's great
Thanks for
having you
having me.
on, and thanks everyone for listening today. And if you found this podcast helpful, definitely like it and share with a friend who might benefit. And stay tuned for future episodes.